In this video, we're going to solve linear equations that contain fractions, specifically the coefficients. As you can see in this example, the coefficients of x or the constants, those terms contain fractions. And so some students, teachers, whichever method you want to go with, but some of them will just take the equation as is and just go ahead and solve it working with the fractions. And that's okay. You can do all the fraction operations. Like we can add the 3x over here and we can subtract the 7/3 over here. You would just have to do the fraction operations, which is perfectly fine. However, I actually recommend doing this method where we're going to eliminate the fractions first. If we can do this first step correctly, then it gives us all whole numbers to work with, and generally that makes it easy. And then also, this step can lend to other things like when you're solving rational equations and so forth. So it is useful elsewhere. So the first thing that you want to do is you want to look at all of your terms and we want to look at the denominators and find the least common denominator. Then we're going to multiply the entire equation, which means term by term, by that LCD or least common denominator. So this is how we're going to get rid of the fractions. Then we're going to just solve as usual because we'll have an equation that no longer contains fractions. So let's practice. Here's two examples that we can work through. So what we're going to do is start with the first example and make sure you recognize that you have four terms. Okay, so we have four terms here. And the first thing we want to do is find the least common denominator. And if it's helpful, you could even, write this over 1 just to make sure that everything has a fraction-like form. And you can see all of your denominators would be 2, 3, 1, which isn't really going to contribute much, but then you have a 3. So you're looking for the smallest number that all of those numbers will divide into. So basically 2 and 3. So the smallest number that those will divide into would be 6. So we need to identify that first as our least common denominator. So the least common denominator is going to be 6. So the next step is going to be multiplying each of those terms by the least common denominator. Now I'm going to write it out explicitly, but of course, once you get a little quicker, you don't have to write it out so clearly. But I want to do this to emphasize that we're multiplying each term, and I'll even put this back over the 1. And we're multiplying each term by that 6. Okay, so you've got 6 times the first term, 6 times the second term, and that's everything on the left side of the equation. And then we have 6 times this term on the right side of the equation, and then 6 times the 1/3 right here. So you can do it all in one step. Or we can write it out like this. And so when we do this, I like to use my cross-canceling method. You can certainly multiply 6 times -7, get that number, and then divide by 2. Or you can do cross-canceling and say 2 will divide into 6, and that gives you 3. And then 3 times the -7 will give you -21, and then you have x. So that keeps the numbers smaller, which makes it easier to do all of the calculations. So here 3 will divide 6, that'll give you a 2. 2 times the 7 is 14. And on the right side, we'll just get -18x. And then here 3 will divide 6, and we'll make that 2. And so 2 times 1 will have a -2. And so this step can usually go pretty fast once you practice. And it makes the equation so much more friendly, right? Because you don't have any fraction operations that you have to deal with, which can be a little more tedious because it has more steps. So then from here, we can just add the 18x over, and we're just showing all of our steps. So that's going to give us negative 3x plus 14 equals a minus 2. We can subtract the minus 14 or subtract 14. And so you have minus 3x is minus 16. And then dividing both sides by a negative 3, x is going to be 16 over 3. So that will be our final answer for this particular problem. Now, if we look at the second problem, and we can shrink this one down just a little bit to get it out of the way. We could go a little bit quicker on that one. So our second problem, once again, go ahead and write this. If you wish, you can write that over 1. And now you see all your denominators. Essentially, you have a 3 and a 4. So we're going to choose the LCD to be 12. And so you could also just do it like this if you wish, instead of breaking it apart and writing it out step by step here. So just make sure that you remember you have 4 terms, right? So you have to multiply the 12 times this term, and then on the other side of the equation, those 2 terms over there. So you'd have to multiply times everything. So the first one, 12 times negative 4 over 3. The 3 will divide into 12. That'll be 4, so we'll get a negative 16y. Next, we'll divide this particular 3 into this 12, so that gives us 4, so minus 16. And this 4 into the 12 gives us 3, and 3 times the 3y is 9y. And then finally, 12 times 3 over here will be plus 36. And so we'll just go ahead and subtract 9y from both sides. So that's going to give us minus 25y minus 16 equals 36. Add 16 to both sides. So if we add 16 to both sides, we'll get a 52 on the other side, positive 52. Divide by negative 25. So that's going to be negative 52 over 25, and that does not simplify, so we'll say that is our final answer. Okay, so next time you get an equation that has fractions in it, try this method. It really does make it go faster once you get the method down, and then you can eliminate error because you won't have as many computations to deal with the fractions. Okay, so enjoy your practice. See you in the next video.